So in kind of broad terms, in crude terms, you have a great flood. There are survivors. These survivors come from 7 different locations to populate areas of the planet.
Where humans are hanging out.
Where humans are hanging out, to kind of kickstart everything again.
Exactly.
And then they head off.
And then they just disappear. It's like, where did they go? It's like they... And again, every indigenous story around the world tells exactly the same story. They arrived on boats without oars, so they could have had sails. Although there's a story in one of the remote islands in Indonesia that talks about how there's an engine in one of the boats. And they built an entire village actually as a mirror image of the boat, and the most holiest of the temple is where the engine house used to be. And it's a great story.
Yeah.
Why would primitive people make this stuff up? What would they know was an engine? They didn't have that stuff back then, allegedly. And so these people appear in hotspots all the way around the world, and that's where the story of the book starts really sort of gathering traction. Because I would go to Central America, to Yucatan, hang out with the Maya, who is still around.
Yeah.
My good friend, wisdom keeper, Miguel Angel Vergara, who is a library, a walking library. And we spend a lot of time together doing tours, so we have a lot of free time to hang out. We basically, I just asked him all these questions. Says, "Oh yes, the people that came from Atlantis, but that's not what they called it back then. That's what the Greeks called it."
Right.
So what do you know? I'm tracking a missing people before the Maya, I believe. Yeah, our predecessors came from a sunken island in the middle of the Atlantic called Atoll, and they were called the Its. They didn't really believe in vowels back then. There were a lot of consonants in the names. And then they became Atitlan to the Olmec and the Aztec. And of course that becomes Atlantis to the Greeks. And the Chilam Balam gives you an exact date of their arrival, 9600 BC, which is exactly the same date that the priests in Egypt tell Solon, the Greek scholar, when he's visiting the priest of Sais in Egypt, takes the story back to Greece, tells it to his son. He tells it to Plato. Plato mythologizes the story as a conversation between 2 statesmen. So that's the connection. And the other point of contact is that the Its, who moved through Yucatan, they rebuild the images, they rebuild the cities and the images of the temples that they had lost. Very bittersweet story. And they call one of them Chichen Itza in their name. They eventually end up in Guatemala. We have Tikal, Uxmal. All of these were the original temple cities of the gods that are now sunk. And what we see today at the outer layer of the onion, the original buildings are actually inside. There are 5 pyramids inside each one of these temples. And they basically went as far away from the ocean as they possibly could get away from. And they were called the people of the Serpent. That was their kind of a name of office, a badge of office, if you like. Had nothing to do with snakes. It also was a metaphor for the fact that it knew how to manipulate the Earth's energy lines. That's the usual metaphor for the serpent. But the same story and the same people appears on the other side of the Atlantic after Atoll sinks, which is the Ophusa in Portugal, where I was born. Literally in the mountain at the foot of where I was born. I'm not kidding you. Wow. Here I am, 6'5". I was blonde when I was young, believe it or not. It makes me wonder what my part in this is sometimes, because I also don't look Portuguese. They were called the Ophusa, literally means the people of the serpent. Well, that also appears in the Lords of Anu, the Annunaki. They were called the serpent people as well. It was the badge of office. And some of them are actually shown in figurines, human bodies with little serpent or lizard heads, which sets off all kinds of conspiracy theories about genetic manipulation. No, it's like saying that the Egyptian god of wisdom, Thoth, was also a genetic manipulation of a human body with the head of a bird.
Right.
No, they used this anthropomorphic device to show ignorant people that this god was to do with wisdom, because look at how elegant he is. He's got the book, and he's got the pen, and he's got the ibis head.
Yeah.
It's just taking a piece of nature and saying he has the ibis head because the ibis is an elegant bird. Wisdom will make you elegant, like Horus having the head of a hawk, because he can see from above what's going on down below. He sees the big picture.
Yeah.
So they don't understand that symbology, so you get to the conspiracy theory of ancient aliens and all this other stuff which bears no resemblance to reality.
What was quite interesting, Freddie, something else you wrote about, that certain individuals were foretold that this was going to happen. And then, the lovely story about Enoch and so on. Just wondering whether you could play with that one.
Oh God, yeah, that was amazing. And again, it goes back to these extraordinary stories that the ancients keep telling about how special people were forewarned. They seem to have the power of clairvoyance. It was very easy for them back then. And it wasn't just one story. And I should say that Enoch was actually a Hebrew version of an older Mesopotamian story. And the Babylonians were really pissed off about this. We say pissed off? Yes.
Yes.
We're in London.
Yeah.
We can say what we like.
Exactly.
They were really pissed off with the Hebrews or the Jews or the Israelites, whatever you want to call them. They're three different people, but let's just group everybody together in the time period. The Hebiru, who were a wandering tribe of nomads, they ended up in Babylon, and they borrowed their story from the Babylonians, and the Babylonians said, no, they've completely politicized these stories of the flood and everything else to create the Bible, to basically say that the Jews are much more supreme than anybody else in the region. Well, the Babylonians did exactly the same thing, calling the kettle black.
Yeah.
And they borrowed it from the Sumerians. The Sumerians had borrowed it from somebody else. So the original story goes back to Mesopotamia, to a guy called Emed Uranu, who basically was the blueprint for Enoch. So if you read his story, it's exactly the same. It has a few more tidbits in there. And
can you remind us what happened with Enoch? What happened? Did he come get a visitation and say, look, mate, this is what's going to be?
Well, Enoch basically, the only big change in the story is the fact that the Hebrews make Mount Hermon to be the center of the gods, the place where the gods lived.
Yeah.
Maybe, we don't know. The whole thing was so politicized. It could have been the Middle East, it could have been I suspect it was closer to the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, but we just don't know for sure.
Yeah.
And I speculated in the book where it could be,
Yeah.
which is a whole other story. But Enoch basically was a scribe. He appears to have been a descendant of the lords of Anu, from where we get the Annunaki, who've been given really negative public relations over the years.
And they are, from your book, it sounds like they're quite generic term as well. And
It's
it turns
the
out
people of Anu.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're all associated with Orion, which we'll get to.
Yes.
It's another whole subject in itself. And they were a part of the group of gods that I was talking about, this enclave of people who seem to be way ahead of Neanderthals and of hunter-gatherers. They had this wonderful ability to clairvoyantly predict things. They were master astronomers. They got from A to B, and they basically were looking after themselves. For some reason, they were here on Earth. They used to anoint themselves with oil, which is where you get the word "shining ones" from. That's where the term comes from. They shone, their skin shone. But they were also enlightened, so it's also a metaphor for their knowledge. They were very tall, 8.5 to 10 feet tall, according to the Edfu text in Egypt. And they also had orange hair, green eyes, or they were blonde and blue-eyed. That's where we get the Nordic strain from, not because they were from Norway or from Sweden. That's what they inherited in that part of the world. And Enoch was apparently one of those scribes who seems to be half god, half human. And he was given the privilege of hanging out with the lords of Anu in their encampment, one of the havens, and there were 7 of them. And he was told, okay, we're going to show you an image of what's going to happen in 200 years from now. Your great-grandson, Noah, of course that's not his real name, it's actually a Mesopotamian guy. I think it was Yima who was the actual real person. He's told to tell your grandson Noah that you're going to have to start preparing, building a big boat. You've got plenty of time, 200 years, and you're going to put everything in there, and that's where the story multiplies around the world 184 times. The same story all around the world. Yeah. He writes down everything. He tells the story about the Watchers, who are the intermediaries. They're kind of like the Anu, but they're not. They're related to the Anu in some way, which is not defined. But they too are quite clairvoyant. They too have special powers. And they were just messengers. They were the go-between between the lords of Anu and human beings. And their idea is to go down and hang out with humans, just tell them enough about how to get civilized and then get the hell out of there. You don't want to mess around in their development. They need to find out things for themselves. Of course, the story goes a little bit woofy because 200 of these Watchers decide, hey, Earth girls are really cool.
Yeah.
Earth
girls, chicks are...
Earth chicks are cool. And that's where the problem started because, and they were told in uncertain terms, our type and humans make strange bedfellows. Metaphorically, and also genetically.
Yeah.
And that's where the problems began. But they get all the attention. The renegade watchers suddenly are associated with bad Anunnaki. All the Anunnaki are bad people. No, no. These were wisdom keepers. These were people who had, they were trying to maintain a decorum here.
Yeah.
And they get all the bad rap for these few people that actually did some very stupid things. And it was from the offspring of the Watchers and human women that we get the Nephilim, which is basically a word, it's an old Hebrew word, it means Orion. They are the children of Orion. And again, another story.
Yeah.
And it's a very sad story because of the genetic makeup was so bad that the women would give birth to infants. Which of course killed the mothers. The Hopi and the Wichita of Oklahoma, they talk about this still, that when the tall people, the giants, mated with our women, the women died.
Yeah.
There was no hope, which is why the interbreeding had to begin with the Watchers and the fallen Watchers and the people of Anu in order to survive, but that created its own problems here on Earth. So they were forewarned about the impending disaster that was coming, and they were told to basically, anything that you have that's part of the civilizing arts, make sure you store it in the boat. Well, the Egyptians had the same story as well. The Arab tradition still talks about a pharaoh before the flood, about 300 years before the flood, has this terrible dream, gets up in a cold sweat, and he gets together all his astronomers, priests, and he says, listen, I've had this incredible prophetic dream, take a measurement of the sky, find out how true this is. And they said, yes, the prognosis is that we are going to be hit with a disintegrating comet about 300 years from now. And he said, start building pyramids. I mean, it's right there, black and white. Start building pyramids so we can make a repository to hide everything that we have learned up to this point, which according to the Sumerians was over 140,000 years of history.
Wow.
Yeah, the Egyptians talk about their king list going back to 36,000 BC. The Phoenicians, the Sumerians go back even further than that. And it's a matter of fact for them. It's a matter of historical record for them. So they said quite plainly, we'll build pyramids. They had the Jehuti, or Toph as we call them in Greek, to build these pyramids and other repositories where we'd hide all the knowledge that would withstand the flood. So everything was forewarned. They knew about what was coming around, as though something was clockwork, something in the universe was very clockwork, like the Earth once in a while goes through a field of debris that once in a while we just happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, which of course sets up another question, what is this field of debris, and why were people like the Maya obsessed with using long calendars? I mean, 130,000 year calendars. You don't need that to tell hunter-gatherers how to grow corn. You need the calendar to tell you where the sun's going to be on the solstice or the equinox and where the moon is going to be. That's it, you're out of here. You can take sticks and build a stone circle or a tree circle and say, this is where the earth is and where the sun is and where the moon is. You don't need more than that. But you don't need 1,600-ton blocks of rock to tell you what the sky is doing. And that brings us to the whole point of,
comets and asteroids and all of that.
Exactly.
Yeah.